That's it.
We're there.
We're in. We're live. How are you, Alex?
Going on, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I just asked you about this new haircut. I mean, thank you if this is for the show. I mean,
I had to get the nice trim and
it's
everything.
crazy. It's crazy just for the show. Like, like in these guys that get into institutions, like they always get this kind of a very short haircut. Okay. So, man, I mean, we pumped this kind of a atmosphere about this meetup that I'm gonna ask you some super hard questions. So, like, I'm gonna grill you, but it's hard to grill someone about topics which are really open on the internet. So I will just try to put some things which are really useful for people. I mean, not to talk about some buzzwords and stuff. So and see if you have like any good advices. I mean, I know you have, but maybe I can challenge you a bit. Okay?
Yep, absolutely.
So,
do it.
Just before,
anybody else, if you want to leave comments or something like that, if you have some other hard questions, we can get to those. They're good.
So we have great sponsor. It's called AWS. So they just gave us 5 copies of your book. I mean, that means that it doesn't sell well. I mean, what's the story?
I need some help. I'm trying to move merchandise here.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if this is original book. Like because I have this original book. Is it mirrored now? My screen? Can you like?
I had to change mine so it was mirrored. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's mirror this screen. So I mean, how do I do that? So anyway, mirror my camera. Okay. So this is the original MySQL and DynamoDB book. Okay. But then then came another original book. Okay. So and then your book is this third one. Very good. Although super huge.
I know it. I didn't realize it was so big.
Is it for the old people because I have these giant fonts?
Okay, so that's how I made it on the PDF. And my friend David Wells, he used to always make fun of me that I was an old person because of the size of font that I used. But I didn't realize it until I started printing it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is enormous. It looks like an old person's book.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, so I can really enjoy that reading in print. But is this a message that someone should, some of these old guys should now think about new technologies and
exactly. All you dinosaurs still working on SQL. Come on, there's some new stuff here.
Well, it's good. It's easier to read, and I like it. I like the paper. That's kind of thanks, man. Anyway, so we have 5 copies of the digital copies of the book. So if you ask some super heavy questions or like snarky questions or hard questions, or you just don't like any this show, just we'll give you some books. Okay. So I mean, before the show, I sent Alex a paper with a list of questions, but I mean that's that was just a game. Okay, just wanted him to feel. Yeah, I just wanted you to feel safe. Okay. So I mean. Before we start these technical things, can you just tell us about the story of your family? I mean, did you make cheese before you started making the book?
So my last name is DeBrie. I believe we are I think it means like of Brie, of the Brie region of France. There is a chocolate shop somewhere in France. I visited it when I was in middle school. That's called DeBrie chocolate. So very, very good. But I don't know much background other than that. Other than there's some French there.
So what do you do like every day? Like you're a consultant. You do this DynamoDB for money, and what kind of issues people have in this real life? What do they ask you?
I would say I do consulting around DynamoDB and just like serverless architectures generally. But a lot of people will be like, hey, either we want to get our team up to speed on Dynamo, would you do some generic training around that, or hey, we have this specific new application, new data model we need to design, and will you just help guide us through that sort of thing? And it ends up being part training, but part applied to their specific data model in that case. So that's that.
How often do you really get your hands dirty? Like I see that you're not stressed, like you're kind of relaxed guy always. I mean, I'm always under some kind of stress because of bugs in production and stuff like that. Yeah. So you just say some stuff and then they have to do that by themselves, like...
Yeah, generally, yeah. So it's a good life, right?
What a great position. I mean, I hate you. Okay, so like, if you're that smart, okay, if when you can definitely describe Dynamo in 60 seconds. What is DynamoDB?
Yeah, so Dynamo is a fully managed NoSQL database provided by Amazon Web Services. So NoSQL, it's not going to be your traditional SQL relational database. It's going to be more key value-ish or wide column if you're familiar with that sort of terminology. So more like Cassandra, a little bit more like Mongo, things like that. I would say the big distinguishing factor between even Mongo, Cassandra, and Dynamo is that it's going to be fully managed for you. Where you don't have to really think about servers, anything. I think it was serverless before people were talking about serverless, and you're just paying for the capacity you need.
You call it a database. You said it's a database. I mean, just because it's I'm asking this because I have to understand, is it a database or a service? Because if there is no DBA, like how can it be a database?
You don't need a DBA to be a database. And I've seen people say like, hey, you need a query planner for it to be a database or something along those lines. I don't think that's quite true. It's really hard to sort of come up with a term database that includes, I think, relational databases, NoSQL databases, data warehouses, but does not, but filters out things like S3 or even like Athena on S3 or MapReduce or different things like that. I would generally say, hey, if you have durable storage that allows for retrieval based on multiple different access patterns, so which could mean a query planner, or it could mean secondary indexes like DynamoDB has.
But you cannot do any kind of performance tuning on the backend side, let's say.
But you don't need any of that. Like, I mean, I assume our databases are going to get better, even like RDS and things like that, to where they won't even expose the parameters to us anymore. And does that mean it's not a database anymore if they don't expose that to us anymore? I don't think that's what makes it a database.
I mean, if it's just we may call it API, okay, but I would say it's a database because it has some limits. It's not like a unlimited playground. I mean, so that's when I feel that there is something there. Like when I use S3, I usually have feeling okay. There are no limits. I can almost do anything. Okay, with the API. But then with Dynamo, I mean, sometimes you can get into trouble. Like, can you just give us your impression after all these years, how unlimited DynamoDB is really?
There are a few places where you are going to be limited with Dynamo. I think probably the one that's going to come into play most often is if you have super hot data on specific keys, right? Whether that means reading from a key or a range of keys quite often, although that's easier to sort of handle with caching in front of that, or if it's writing to a particular key really hot in really hot patterns, right? It's just, there are partition throughput limits, which are basically applied to a storage partition. And if you have a key within that partition, they'll do a lot of work to sort of isolate hot keys and things like that. But if you're exceeding 1,000 write units per second or 3,000 read units per second on an individual key or a tightly clustered range of keys, like that's a hard problem. So that's going to be.
So you say it's not the problem because it's like a high limit. I mean, do you feel that it's?
I think that's a pretty high limit. I don't run into a ton of people that actually have that particular issue. I see a different class of customers than the AWS teams that see like the actual like enormous volume customers and things like that. So I'm sure that like there are people that have different issues with that, and it's especially if you're talking about like social media type stuff and just the if you have like a zip distribution, things like that. It's possible, but
is it
not
like
an issue for you
in real life? In real life, like with these real applications that most of us do in our life, like. Do you see that we can ever get into such situations that we get trouble and
no? I would say almost all people are not going to have issues with actual throttling on like the partition itself, not on like not setting the table capacity high enough, but actually like, hey, you're pushing Dynamo beyond what it can do. No, most people are not going to have any issue near that. But that's also true of the relational database. Most people aren't going to have aren't going to be pushing.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you. Like I'm just saying like. We have some standard usage, like a mid-level usage. And then who cares? I mean, what's the story? Like, why should we just for the small project or a big project start with one or the other database? Like, what's the story with starting with Dynamo? I mean, it's obvious that Dynamo has many advantages in the low level and also on the top level, but somewhere in between, it's pretty much the.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say there are a couple of reasons you might specifically pick up Dynamo, and one is going to be, hey, if you really want that top end performance, or if you really want predictable performance, and maybe your access patterns are simple enough that just predictability is 100% of what I want. I'd also say like the reason I got into it, the reason a lot of people got into it, is how it works so well with serverless, with Lambda, and that whole compute model. I think that was a big thing for a lot of people.
Yes. Okay. So everyone is talking about this serverless thing. Market. Is it a marketing term or not? So I don't want to bother you too much about this because it's another buzzword, another problem. Like we have now. But was it fair to call DynamoDB serverless before on-demand mode?
That's a good question. I
mean, if you have to pay for it,
yeah, maybe not. But I would say it's sort of more in the serverless vein than I would say it's more serverless than a relational database. It's more serverless than like RDS. I'm saying more serverless than Elasticsearch or OpenSearch, wherever you're sort of running that sort of thing. But it'd be sort of almost more like Kinesis streams in that sense, where I'd say like, hey, it's pretty close to serverless. Like you are not seeing servers. You're paying on a dimension that's abstracted from servers. But the fact that you still have to have like basically pre-provision or pay for capacity, whether you're using it or not. Yeah, it doesn't probably get it all the way to fully serverless.
Yeah, of course. I'm not sure if it was Ben Kehoe or someone who said that serverless is a spectrum, but it's we are trying to find that kind of a good place for it. But with all these limits in other services, not just Dynamo, we're still not there. Like someone promised us the cloud that will be unlimited in any direction.
Yeah.
But still we have memory limits, quotas, and stuff like that.
I mean, physics still exists, like, and we're still limited. Maybe in a generation we'll have compute and memory and storage and all that will be so cheap that is truly unlimited. But yeah, we're still not there yet.
Yeah. So how do you feel that? I mean, when you deal with regular relational databases. I mean, you have this feeling that you can take it with you and do something somewhere else, and but still they are made of some kind of open source components. Would you say that Dynamo is better because it's a proprietary thing that you cannot take it and then they will fix it for us? I mean, so I mean we discussed that on reInvent, and I have this feeling that I cannot break it if I just use it. With MySQL, I can definitely break it if I just do some crazy transaction.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're saying of just like, is Dynamo better because it's proprietary? And it's like, it depends on what you care about as a person. Like if you are very concerned with lock-in and portability and all that stuff, then like Dynamo hurts you there because, hey, maybe you can go to Scylla, right? Scylla has, I think, a DynamoDB compatible layer, things like that, or a few different things. But mostly, you're gonna have to do some changes there. But I think because it's proprietary, because they are only building it for themselves internally, they're able to take advantage of the cloud and like of all sorts of different things. And because it was built sort of multi-tenant from the beginning and not sort of assume that, hey, other people are going to want to run this itself. Like I think it's architected and operated in a way that is distinctly better than something that has to go sort of more lowest common denominator.
Then what do you say about the fact that it's just a 10 or 100,000 MySQL servers behind it?
I don't agree with that. I still can't get a straight answer exactly on. I mean, so basically, some of the history is like,
what's the problem? What's the problem? Let's be open. Like it's just we have tens of thousands of servers which have to be something, and these small units deal with some 10 gigabyte units, smaller units. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And they turned to be that these small servers
We're using InnoDB. Is that I believe like we're using the storage layer, I believe, of MySQL. Not, they're not using, it's not like they're running a bajillion MySQL instances all over the place. I think they're using potentially the storage layer, and I'm not sure that's still the case. It's kind of hard and cagey to get an exact answer there. But go ahead.
So what's the value in? I mean, is it just a bunch of MySQL servers with unlimited number of MySQL servers? And someone was smart enough to say, okay, I will split everything in 10 gig partitions, and then because they are just small enough, I can move them around and split them if I want. And now I get the database. That's it.
I mean, is that just what it is? In some sense, yeah. Hey, it's horizontal sharding with key-based partitioning, right? Like that's done a lot of places. And like, if you want to do that with like more fuller SQL options, like Yugabyte, Vitess, different things like that, do similar things. But I would say it's also the combination of the sort of infrastructure and the operational stuff around it that give you secondary indexes on different infrastructures, so they get their own throughput and partitions and all that stuff. You get streams, you get high availability.
These
no,
things
that's not extra. That's like the availability and just like reliability and predictability of Dynamo. I think is unique. It would be hard to replicate yourself.
Of course, because I cannot make a Kubernetes cluster with a million pods. I mean, it's super expensive. I cannot make 10 million pods to make 10 million partitions.
Yeah.
But of course, it would be possible to make something like that on a smaller scale. But then you don't have enough partitions. So,
exactly. But then think of how much stuff gets amortized over a million customers, right? It's not just like all those partitions that like then help to like aggregate all that usage together and sort of smooth that out. But it's like all this operational stuff where like if you're running your own Cassandra database or something like that, it doesn't make sense for you specifically to put as much operational time into it as it does for the DynamoDB team. Like they can put a team of, 10 or 30 people on like some tiny aspect of this operational stuff. And it's just like a huge lever to make that better for so many customers where that doesn't exist for you if you're running it yourself.
So let's mention this DynamoDB paper from 2020.
Yeah.
Okay. So like there are some really good things there, some really interesting things that show that that's a super complicated Kubernetes cluster. It's not not a small thing, okay? Yep. So I understand that part of the story. So it's not possible to replicate Dynamo in a because you don't have this infrastructure. And then with all these problems, they bring some solutions for the infrastructure problems. So that's great, okay? But on the other side, like they don't bring us like too many. I mean, my question actually is about innovation in the user experience. So it's obvious that the complexity of the infrastructure is amazing. Okay, so the delivery is amazing, performance, stability, amazing, everything is. But then like they kind of focus on this backend stuff, and then how do you feel about that? Is there enough innovation on the user experience side?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say like on the data modeling sort of user feature side, the last like truly major things to come out, like truly game changers, would be like transactions and global tables, which I believe were both 2018, 2019. Like those were big ones. But since then, it's been more, I guess, availability, scalability, all the ilities, right? So it's adaptive capacity, and then going to instant adaptive capacity, and then going to on-demand billing, like you're saying. Like none of those change really how you model data in DynamoDB that much, but they do like smooth over some really hard edges and make it easier for you to handle a lot of that stuff. And now I think we're seeing a lot of like, hey, how do I get this data out of here better or into Dynamo? So export to S3, import to S3, different things like that. And then like, as you're seeing in the DynamoDB paper, a lot of like under the hood things they've done around availability, around leader election, and preventing like, sort of erroneous leader election or log replica, different things like that.
So 2 questions for you. So if you can pick like the hardest thing to do to make the replica of MySQL, sorry, it's always on my mind. So if you have to make a replica of DynamoDB, what do you think would be like the hardest part of the job, like infrastructure thing? Okay.
If I was a company that wanted to sort of replicate Dynamo, what would be?
You want to make Dynamo. You know how it has to perform.
Yeah.
and you know it has MySQL inside of it, like just as a unit, or a small database. You can use it as a database just for one. But then, like, what is the story? Like hot partitions?
Yeah,
streaming?
I would like my guess is like, that someone on the DynamoDB team could tell me I'm wrong and say like, hey, it's this specific technical thing that's harder. My guess is it would be 10 years, 11 years now of just like operational excellence and doing the sort of operational reviews that they do in AWS and continually iterating and cranking that up. And they're like all these little corners of the system that they've improved. Whereas like, a decent part of the overall architecture is available either in the DynamoDB paper or in Jasso Sorensen's talk from 2018, different things like that. Like a decent part of that is available. And there's a lot of other database tech. Like it's not like totally reinventing the wheel there, but then just like, hey, the reality of operating it at this enormous scale for 11 years now. And the, even seeing in the paper, the ways they've had to sort of redesigned how they handled capacity, and going from like a more instance node centric one to one that's more sort of table centric and what that looks like. And just like, that I think building that sort of knowledge up and
but
just,
it's pretty much about like routing requests, doing some kind of streams. Don't we have all these components already? Like of course, it's just a combination of everything. I understand that's actually very nice and good answer. I mean, I know you're a nice guy. I mean, I don't you don't want to say any bad things about AWS or like. So anyway, but from a perspective of user experience, why do you think it's so hard to move faster? Like we don't get any new indexes. I mean, there's so many new.
When you're talking new indexes, would you want something like an invert index or like a geo index or something like that?
I mean, all these kinds of indexes, because I cannot do anything without an index. Like any special things. I mean, so
I think.
Why do you think it's that there's a lack of this innovation? Because I mean, we know that these small units, these servers, let's say that they are DynamoDB or something. They should support some of these things, like they should be easy to build on. I mean, of course, it was probably that in the past, but now who knows what's inside. I'm just saying, like, it's not that it doesn't look that hard to add some index.
The one thing I would say is it doesn't look that hard to add that index, but I think Dynamo has this particular guarantee that it gives you of just like basically like, hey, predictable performance no matter what, no matter number of requests, number of data in your table, anything like that. And the way it does that is it essentially says every single request you make will get immediately directed to a single server and read no more than a megabyte of data, right? And that's it's potentially you might have to hit a few different partitions to do that, but generally that's like the promise it gives you, and that's. And then basically within that, as long as you're under the partition throughput limits, it's going to be sort of scaling forever. Some of those indexes, don't sort of work as well with that. They're going to be hotter in particular ways, or you need to read more data, or you need to read data across a lot of different index or different partitions and things like that break that promise. And I would guess, like, this is something I've talked with them and people about. You're just like, how can we add in some of those sort of, awesome user experience features, but also make it clear that it's like, hey, here's the predictable 100% scalable part of Dynamo. And here's like the, I don't want to say unpredictable, like non-scalable part, but the part that you're going to have to, like, you're sort of taking on more of that potential risk of just like, hey, this isn't going to scale to the moon like everything else with Dynamo. You have to be a little more careful.
So let's take just one example of user experience. I wrote you about like this question about making select distinct or stuff like it's doable in a way that you can make a CDK construct or CloudFormation and make this whole infrastructure with streaming and making another table, which would be just for that. I mean, what would you do? Like, if I ask you to create a select distinct thing, would you?
Can you tell me, like, what do you need select distinct for? What are you using it for?
Oh, if for example, if I have import of millions of users or like data, and then you have some columns that you just want to have available. So one of the columns is like I don't know, city where they live in. I just want all these cities to be available in a drop-down list somewhere else. Okay. So I want this to be automatically created out of this. Whenever something changes, I just want this list to be updated. If it's removed from the list, it should be removed and stuff like that. So, I mean, just one of these examples where you can build an infrastructure to build such a thing. This table, which would consist of like distinct, only of distinct values. So, should we expect AWS to build something like that for us? Okay, I mean, add a distinct table from this column.
I think it would be kind of interesting, like, hey, could they have these sort of add-on features, either like aggregations by this and this, and just maintain that for me, or like you're saying, distinct for this, like adding some of those things? That would be kind of interesting.
It's hard. I mean, what would you do? Would you do the same thing, like streaming plus Lambda, which would...
Yeah, probably, and just like maintaining that, maybe maintaining a set somewhere or something goofy like that. Yeah, it'd be kind of goofy. But again, why don't they do that? Why don't they get it? Like, how would you design that within that guarantee of like, hey, I want to go to one node and read no more than 1 megabyte of data? Like, how do you sort of store that?
It would be like that's what I'm asking. Like, it's just another table where I stream my data. Okay, when I access that table will have a guaranteed performance. I'm saying that the same thing for the indexes. If I build another index, correct me if I'm wrong, but the index is nothing else but just another table.
Yeah, but you want like a materialized view almost, or like a reduced. Yeah, I would love that. Like, I don't know if you've seen like the Noria paper or like some of like the aggregations on top of SQL, where it's like basically you sort of write a SQL query, right, and it's going to materialize that for you. And
yes.
I would love to see some of that, where, like you're saying, the distinct and just like maintain that. One of the features that I have been asking for, I think would be super cool, is what I call table functions, where it's just like, I want to write a Lambda function, and I have that function. It's expecting a batch of DynamoDB records. And then I go to my DynamoDB table and I say, run a scan on my table and just pump it to this function for me. And I can say how many workers I want. I want 1 worker. I want 1,000 workers. However, they're just going to manage it for me, and I can do that. And then I think if they enabled that, then you could even see, like, this isn't a great option, but you could see like open source options where it's just like, hey, maintain, like, here's the Lambda you need to maintain distinct, right? And you can sort of set up your scan on it, and then you also set it up on your streams table, and it does it for you. And I think like the table functions would give you a ton of power. I'd also like if they package it with like a few of those common use cases, select distinct, group by this value and sum or whatever. And like, I think that would be great.
That would make the whole infrastructure even like more complicated. I assume that they just want to keep it simple to sleep. They want to sleep well at night. I mean, I understand that thing, but still the user experience is lacking. It's getting even, I would say that it's getting even worse. Okay, so that's why we have companies that make user interface to build single table design. We have companies that make aggregations easier from DynamoDB. We have companies that make cache from DynamoDB. I mean, we can just say more and more stuff. I mean, it should be there. Like, shouldn't be like a super complicated thing to just go in any of these directions and help people. Okay, so I mean, at least like we talked about. I asked you about the problem of getting stuff from Dynamo to Redshift. But then the problem that I had was like a experience in the Redshift V2 console or something. Like it just didn't work properly. It didn't show me the issues with the permissions and stuff like that. Anyway, like it's not easy. Yeah, it's not easy to copy data from Dynamo to Redshift so you can make.
I don't get why they haven't made that copy command easier, because like it doesn't even support sort of like scalar columns, right? It supports strings, numbers, and binary, but it doesn't support lists or maps or anything like that, which is just like, why wouldn't you just like pull that in as a string and I can parse it in Redshift? So
how do you do that? Like how do you solve this problem of analytics aggregations like today?
I would generally say like look at the type of data you have, and they're generally like two types of data, right? There's like immutable event-like data, and if that's the case, DynamoDB streams to Firehose, and now you put it into S3, Redshift, whatever you want to do, and it's easy because like it's immutable. You can just be constantly putting that in, but you also might have like your mutable sort of core data, users, things like that. that's a little trickier to like do with the streaming thing, because now you're like mutating stuff in your data warehouse, which is like a pain in the rear, I would say, most of the time. So I would usually say, how often do you need that fresh, and if like, is it fine for you to export your users once a week, do an export to S3? Your users probably aren't that many, so just dump them to S3, load it into Redshift, and now you're good to go.
But in many cases these days we need real-time analytics.
But so, like, what kind of real time do you need on your users table? Like if you think of, hey,
no, the users table. I mean, just it's a many tables, like sales stuff. I mean, you do stuff in Dynamo, but then okay, I just want to see my sales for today from this morning. I don't want to wait.
Yep. But then sales, like, that's probably a mutable event like data, right? So then you can just stream that out, and that could be in there in like 15 minutes lag, or I don't know what the fire hose, probably less than that if you're, depending on how much you set the buffer on it. But like, so you can do that with your immutable stuff, and that's in there pretty regularly. And then you just have to understand, like, hey, if your core stuff is still in, only getting refreshed less often.
Can you recommend some products that would do all this stuff for us?
Yeah, I mean, I like Rockset. Like that's my go-to.
Rockset.
Rockset's awesome. Yeah, I think they're probably the best at this. Yeah,
we need tools. Like if we don't have tools to make this thing easy, then everyone will have to do some kind of a programming of streams.
Yeah.
No. So you wrote a blog post yesterday about. I mean, you published it yesterday about streams.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I don't want to say anything bad, but I wouldn't say that there is anything new in that post, but just like you reminded me, like of, I mean, it's all there, I mean, we were talking about these things, like it's all there, just people asking questions about things which are already in the frequently asked questions or the books and stuff like that. It's nothing super new, but then putting these streams on the stage, it looks like if the streams are actually getting more and more important. You have to refresh cache. You have to refresh analytics. You have to make distinct. You have to whatever you do outside of Dynamo, you need streams.
Yeah, I know. And like probably my like top 3 biggest wishes for Dynamo is that they would just increase the sort of consumer limit on DynamoDB streams natively, because you can do 2 now. If you have a global table, that's one of them, and now it's like, oh man, I got nothing. So I really wish they would increase that. Even like 4 or 5, I think is going to work for most people's use cases.
So you definitely put some emphasis on some other ways to read data from streams, like more about kinesis and stuff, and event bridge pipes and stuff like that. So there should be more and more ways to consume streams, okay? And someone should build. If AWS is not going to build tools for us, I mean, someone should make these tools available.
Wait, what? Maybe a marketplace. What are you missing from the existing way to consume streams? Or you just want like pre-built sort of templates almost?
I need some kind of a visual designers of these things, and I have to understand. I want to understand. Okay, I want to understand that. What's going to happen if I lose some data? I mean, I don't want to lose any data. I don't want to lose a single message. So I probably have to push it first to some SQS FIFO, okay, then do something smart on it, okay.
Yeah.
But as you said in one of the tweets, streams are ordered only by the shard that created it, or the. So it's, you see that MySQL instance that is doing some kind of bin log replication to somewhere is just doing this.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah. I mean, that's basically what it is. Yeah. It's
basically.
I don't think it's not like the actual write-ahead log, but I think it's a different implementation. But yeah, it's going to be just an ordered list of transactions on each individual storage partition. That you're sort of tapping into.
You see, it's because of the whole architecture of Dynamo. We don't have one server. We have many servers which deliver these streams. So this could be a problem in some use cases that I have now. So in production. So I would say that
it's a problem for you that it's only ordered within a shard. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but the problem is like, what is the shard? Like, is it the only way to look at data? Okay, maybe I for that purpose I partition data in one way, okay, but if I have to look at it in the other way, like like from the perspective of time, maybe like when things happened, like it's a bit tricky, when you design DynamoDB table, you have to think about like the usage patterns and stuff, and then you design it in one way. Okay, it's not easy to, you cannot just make it visible in two different ways, like same thing. So maybe sometimes I want to see stream delivered in one way and some other time in another way. If I don't have this guarantee that everything is ordered, then maybe I can have a mess. Okay.
Yeah, I think the only really guarantee you can count on there is any particular item that you are changing will be strictly ordered if you're using DynamoDB streams and not the Kinesis streams implementation. But any particular item will be ordered because that item is going to be on the same shard. Even if you sort of split, they'll handle the sort of waiting to the end of this one and then go into the split and things like that. But even like if you're talking about multiple items that have the same partition key, they could be in different shards because, maybe they've done a split somewhere and now they're on different partitions, right? So the only guarantee you can get is an individual item, a specific item will be ordered. Yeah.
So it can be tricky to do that in real life. Okay, it's a good for examples, for demos, for I don't know, for developer advocates to sell some stuff. Okay, so
but that's just true of streams generally. Like any stream implementation you go to is going to have, Kafka has that partition key concept that splits it out to different partitions. Kinesis has the shard key, all that sort of stuff. Like it's just a reality of how stream scale is through that horizontal scaling with the sharding, and then all you
if it's horizontally split, if it is horizontally split, if it's just like a single server, that's easier.
Yeah,
of course, that's a good thing. Anyway, so one more topic on this is user experience, caching, and like this new products in cache in cache area. So we have Momento, and we already had Redis before, and we had, so we always try to cache something to solve some problems. So my question is for you is, why is DynamoDB not a good cache?
So some people do use it as a cache, and I would say more for like materialized heavy computation type stuff. But if you're talking about like more pure cache use cases, that is just like sort of a different level of performance you expect, probably sub millisecond, whereas Dynamo is going to be single digit millisecond reads, so just like a different level of performance there from a cache being, completely in memory and probably a smaller call stack, not quite as many services going through on the back end there. Dynamo's for traditional cache use cases probably isn't going to be what you're looking for. That's when you're talking Redis, Momento, things like that.
So do you feel that the problem is in protocol? Because everything that is kind of slow or serverless is HTTP, and everything that is fast is in using some kind of binary stuff?
I think the protocol stuff is sort of overrated on that. I think it's more the HTTP ones tend to be doing a little bit more, and that's like related to HTTP, but not necessarily. Like Dynamo, if you go look at the Dynamo paper, or if you look at Amrit's part of our talk at reInvent, like if you just look at the calls it has to make before it gets to that service, that storage layer, there are like a couple calls that are happening, whereas like Redis is going to be a lot shallower one. Memento is going to be a lot shallower one, in addition to the storage being in memory instead of on disk and things like that. So
Memento is using gRPC through HTTP, so it can be done faster.
Yeah, exactly. And like I'm sure that like helps and makes a difference. I probably shouldn't speak on this because I don't know like how much if they were using HTTP instead of gRPC, like what does that performance look like? But I think it's more about sort of the other things that Dynamo is doing as well, that give it some of its other characteristics, but then might add 1-2 milliseconds of latency on a read.
So you didn't mention this size of a record or something like that. I mean, for caching, you would usually use smaller chunks of some data, not big ones. So 400 kilobytes should be, or 1 megabyte or something should be enough to keep some stuff in Dynamo. Okay, but still milliseconds are not enough. So that's what people who are using relational databases are saying. Like when you when you compare stuff and you did some bad stuff, okay? I'm gonna share now some screen with that I promised.
Okay, I should probably change the x-axis on that, but the general point makes sense.
Okay, just give me a second. I'll share some screen with the people. So let's see what you were selling before when you were young, Alex. Okay. Okay.
I was young. That was like.
So this is one of the screens where you were saying bad things about.
Scroll down a little bit. I think I say, yeah, I've got this pulled up because I knew you were going to call me out. It's a rough sketch. But the overall point stands, right?
So you are saying that after 100 gigabytes, MySQL is sluggish, painful, and
depends
stuff
on
like
what
that.
You're doing, right? Like I've definitely seen people with 100 gigs or less have performance issues because they're doing giant aggregations, right, and things like that across their table while other things are running. So,
but if you're doing bad stuff to the database, you will get bad results. If you're treating it well, you're gonna get real results. I mean, some good stuff.
But I think the point remains is just like there is that. I think the key trade-off with Dynamo is that flexibility versus predictability trade-off. And like, maybe you can scoot that curve out a little bit, a few orders of magnitude on that data size or connection number of requests or things like that. But the point stands that at some point, like MySQL is going to tail off, whereas like Dynamo is not going to tail off. And that's why you see Amazon.com on Prime Day doing 110 million requests a second, and they're still getting the same performance.
It's okay. Don't have to repeat that same story about.
I'm just saying,
giant big website with selling billions to something. I mean, what's the story? I mean, I don't want to talk again like about that story about the big or small. I'm just saying like there is a kind of bad technology or good technology language that we see these days, and can we just switch that conversation to something that would maybe help people understand like what is that makes some technologies suitable or not suitable for the cloud? Okay,
I agree, and I love SQL. I think SQL is really great. I think it's really great for a lot of people. I think the key trade-off you're going for there is flexibility versus predictability, and which one. Is there one of those that you care about more? And the truth is, like at a small enough, at a lot of people's level with MySQL, they'll get both, right? You'll get flexibility and predictability because you're just like not at the limits of what you're doing with your relational database. But like I also just like that exactly what you're getting out of the box with Dynamo, and you're not going to have to be sort of getting an alert because your sort of disk is full of log files or whatever reason. Like you're just getting that predictability and sort of like the set it and forget it mindset, right? And so that's the key trade-off, I think, of all that.
Okay, I'll just put some comments to this show. Like caches don't need to guarantee consistency, unlike DBs. Yeah. Of course, this performance is.
And I would say like durability, right? That's more like because you're talking about flushing to disk. Dynamo is also replicating to multiple regions and making sure at least 2 of those nodes accurate. Like that all takes time that a Redis node doesn't have to do.
Yeah. So can you? I mean, we see that DynamoDB is very, very well equipped with. I mean, very okay. Let's grade it 1 to 10. Let's say it's 7. With infrastructure as a code capabilities, and it's a good fit. You can create a table.
How are you giving it a 7? How is it like not a 9.5? There's like one thing that makes me mad about how.
My question for you is like, okay. Did you ever experience any kind of issue with the CloudFormation and Dynamo that would like destroy your table or like do something unpredictable? Like it's strange that you cannot just say alter my table and that's it. It will alter your table, or like to have a blue-green deployment, like you have now in Aurora, to get from one version to another version of the table.
I would say one, maybe 2 things that happen. Number one is going to be if you add or change multiple GSIs in a single CloudFormation update, it's going to throw back at you, which is super annoying. And the way that I see that come up is maybe you have lots of changes happening to like your development stack and you only release to production after a while. And so what might happen is someone makes a commit that adds a GSI, someone else makes another commit that adds a different GSI. Both of those happen to work because they get sort of deployed to staging in different commits, and then they get rolled out to production together, and then it fails. And that drives me nuts because it's like, hey, each of those worked individually, but like now I'm in this goofy state, and you have to like do all sorts of goofy things with that.
But
so
if you know where you are now, and if you know where you will be, and if you can make the transformation, like I'm not sure if you're aware of this blue-green stuff with Aurora, okay?
No.
How or how PlanetScale does this kind of MySQL stuff. So you have old database, you have new database, and you have streaming in between, and you have to match data from the old stuff to the new stuff. Why is that such a big problem? And do you see that? Like, I'm really excited with the fact that I can create a table and stuff with the infrastructure as a code. I cannot do that for MySQL. That's probably intentional from AWS not to do that from this relational databases. But then,
like, would you want to create your 4 different tables all in infrastructure as code? Like, rather than have DDL, you just have your sort of infrastructure as code doing it and creating all those different things?
It's strange, I'm not sure how to answer this. I was really asking for any kind of a SQL support for Dynamo, but then when they delivered it, I said, okay, I'm not using it. So I don't want to be the one who's going to push for new features which I will not use. But then, how do you feel about like these risks of using infrastructure as a code for Dynamo? I mean, should it be that risky?
I don't think it's that risky. I think it works really well with infrastructure as code.
I mean, like changes of the data of the table.
I mean, what changes are you making? Like the big thing, I think the places you're going to run into problems are not understanding Dynamo and therefore making a change that replaces your table. Like if you're like, hey, I just want to change my primary key. Well, you can't do that. Like
Did you hear about that alter table stuff in SQL language? I could just say alter table and it will do it.
Can you change the primary key of your table in SQL? I don't know how that works. Like, is that doable? Man, after it's created?
Everything is doable.
Are you sure? Like, can you actually? I don't know enough about that, but like, can you alter your primary key on your table?
Yeah, man. I mean,
like that's like what your table is, right? That's like the core of it. You can't.
No, it's not. It's just one of the views, one of the ways to look at your table. You can change it easily. Okay, you can alter your primary key, because in most cases, every relational database has a secret ID as a primary key. Like in inside. But then anyway, like you can do any change with alter table, and data will be there. Like it's if you the thing, if you use it in Postgre, it will be under a transaction. You can do stuff. You can change data stuff in the same transaction in Postgre. That's great. Okay, so from a perspective of a customer, I would really like these things to be easy, not to make another table and then copy data there. So how do you do that? Like, do you copy data?
I mean, yeah, if it calls for it, yeah, that's what you're gonna have to do. Yeah, if you're changing the structure of your table, yeah.
So what do you do? What kind of tools you use for moving data?
See, that's why I'd love to see table functions, because I think it would help with that aspect of just like, hey, you need to get all the existing data over into thing. But like, you're gonna have to do some sort of like change your code so that now whatever's happening, you're probably writing to both places. So all ongoing stuff is now getting in there. And then you have to do that backfill, like sort of scan and move everything over there and making sure, hey, if I already have a newer record than what's in my table, like I'm not overwriting that and things like that. So
you're literally going back in time, like for like 30 years.
Yeah, it's not fun. Yeah, I agree. Like that's not a fun thing. And like, the PlanetScale branching, that stuff's pretty slick. I haven't looked at the blue-green with Aurora and how well that works, but I agree.
My question is like, you don't have tools now. You have to write some extra code, extra stuff. Of course, you have to change your code, but then to do alter table or should be able to do that at least on console. I mean, if it's not supported infrastructure as a code, you should use it I do have that capability in console.
Yeah, I mean, one thing. No, I was going to say, like, one thing you could do is export your whole table and then just import it into another table, which they have both those features now. You sort of have that issue of like the writes that happen in between times. So you probably have like a little bit of that plus some streaming, and then point at two things. It'd be a little bit of a dance to do that. But yeah, it's absolutely not as easy as a relational database doing that.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Redshift is actually getting some kind of CDK support to create a table, to create to add a key or something, so you have these capabilities to do this stuff in your code, and maybe like if it's serverless Redshift, you would be able to like not pay for the stuff you don't use. Anyway, it's just playing around with this. The thing is that it's obvious that the infrastructure as a code is the piece that is missing. And if database doesn't support properly infrastructure as a code, you cannot move it fast. You cannot deploy your projects fast. And I usually create my relational databases by click.
I was gonna say, how do you handle the blue-green or like planet scale branching in an infrastructure as code way? That has to be like a operation.
Yeah. That's true. Exactly. So a bit more questions. Like I'm trying to, like, in a way, I'm trying to push you to say, oh, this entire effort is not like worth it. You have to do some kind of a super extra work to do anything. Like, so I'm gonna get into another section like of my questions, which is even worse. Like transactions.
Okay.
So
transactions are great.
I would say that, but understanding transactions, is it do you think that it's easy to understand transactions in Dynamo in a way that that someone was using transactions in relational databases?
It depends. It depends on how much they know about transactions or what they expect from transactions. Like the one thing I do like about Dynamo is it is a much sort of stripped down, simplified version of transactions, where it's like, hey, on the server side, you're like, client side, I guess, sending it to the Dynamo server. You're like, hey, these are the operations I want to do. And now I'm sending them all over to Dynamo for execution. And it's not like on the client, I'm saying, hey, begin transaction. Okay, transaction began. Okay, send this operation's back. Do like this back and forth dance. It's one shot with Dynamo. And either that's going to succeed or fail and happen. And you don't get into like sort of those long running transaction modes or different things like that. Or you don't even, I think Rick brought up the isolation stuff, but you don't have some of the isolation issues that you do in relational database transactions, where you begin a transaction, you read some records, and then you alter some other records based on the result of that read. And that's where you get into like isolation issues. Because what if you have another transaction transaction that's messing with that? With Dynamo, they say, send me your batch of records. If someone else is writing those at the same time, we're going to cancel your transaction. It's like an easier model to think about.
Yeah. Okay, so like, do you think that? Okay, I'll bring another topic to the table, and then we can talk about like a super developer that we need. Okay, for all these things. Okay. So idempotency. Okay, so when I'm coming from Java world, like I was using Java EE technology for years, and one of the things that you can do in Java EE servers, enterprise servers, is that you can have some kind of implicit transactions, like and whatever code you do, it will be under a transaction. So whatever you do, like even if you send a message to a message broker, it can roll back to distributed mechanisms. So
so do you have like some decorator on a function, and they are managing like storing a record of that? Yeah, but it's like they have like some sort of database somewhere that they're just storing a key and managing the result back.
I'm just saying that a message broker can put stuff in some kind of first step of a transaction in a two-step transactions. Okay, so this is a distributed transaction mechanism. Okay, so I'm just saying that developers, from their perspective, they could just write code and think about, and they don't have to worry about what's going to happen. Okay, but now if I have problems, I have to roll back. And how do you roll back all these problems? Even if how do you roll back in a world where everything is where some of the things are eventually consistent? So you change them, but if you connect some other server, you go there, it's not there. You go back in 5 seconds, it's there. So like it's even harder. So how do you think?
Were you talking? I mean, are you talking about correcting something in, like, if you make a write and then for whatever reason you need to roll back that write in Dynamo?
Yes.
You're not going to hit eventual consistency issues. There are not eventual consistent issues on writes with Dynamo. There's like one canonical version of that item that's effective.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just saying, like in a larger perspective of a transaction or a developer writing code, do you, now that we don't have these distributed locks and stuff in a way that was done before, so do you think that we need some really smarter developer than we had before?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I'm sure, I haven't looked that closely, but I'm sure there are libraries out there that could do that same thing for you using DynamoDB as basically your transaction store, right? And basically, like, if you want to wrap this thing that says send a message and then do this and wrap it in a transaction to make sure it happens, something being will reach out to Dynamo, store record, go try and perform the actions, then release that record, and other things can see if it already existed or whatever its state is. And in fact, like Hader was just showing me, Hader Lesso with Lambda Power Tools has something that does this, which I had no idea about, but basically you can just wrap something and say, hey, I want this to be idempotent, and like it's going to be using Dynamo under the hood to make sure that doesn't get processed more than once.
Yeah, that's one of the topics that I just wanted to bring to the table, that at the end, Dynamo proved to be one of the best places to keep that distributed lock in the cloud.
Oh yeah.
So this the conditional writes are excellent thing. So in Power Tools they use it just for that thing. So you don't have this. You don't have that function being executed twice. You just have it. You just check it in Dynamo, and that's it. So it's hard, but but it's not just. It's hard because we have to change the technology. Okay, but now we have this more sophisticated developer that has to do all these things.
Yeah.
So like, would you say that it's so hard, that it's much harder to roll back? Now, for example, you have a batch, and then batch can fail.
Yeah.
And like you have to think about which part of the batch failed, and then you have to send a note. Okay, this message is failed. This didn't fail. I mean, so many things. Like, is it hard to be DynamoDB developer?
Is it hard to be a Dynamo? I mean, probably at first, because you're just like, what is this thing? This thing is so different. But then I think it does break down into much simpler component parts and much more transparent component parts than a relational database, where with a relational database, you can get into some truly nasty bugs or like features that are available and you think are going to work until they don't. And I think there's less of that. It just, like, Dynamo does what it says on the tin.
Okay, yeah, stripped to some core things. Then if you just kind of Lego stuff, and then but it's just simple pieces.
Yeah, I would say simple pieces, but like, I mean, one thing I love about it too is I think it does teach you a lot. Like, going back to relational databases now, I just have a better understanding of like what will work, what won't work, what to avoid, and things like that, and just aware in a way that was more opaque to me when I was doing more with relational databases.
So like, let's go to one of the topics, which is like also hot. When Rick Callahan left the company, he made some mess, in Twitter. But I mean, he was the king of Dynamo before you, so he was like the most prominent man on the stage. But before him, I mean, I didn't really think about Dynamo too much.
Yeah.
But then when he brought this single table design thing on the table, then I realized, okay, this distributed thing is it works like that. I have to, if I think about that, I can achieve this. Okay. So like a whole new thing. Okay, it's not that like I really used a single table design too much, but then the whole concept helped me to understand this thing.
Yeah,
how Dynamo works. So it is good. So did you after he left the company, he put a lot of things on the table?
Yeah.
So do you think that, so out of all these things, what do you think is like the most important request or complaint or something that would really improve Dynamo?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what he said. The two sort of quibbles I can remember him having in the last year would be, number one, wishing Dynamo had optional schema enforcement, so you could basically upload a JSON schema or something like that and get that enforcement. I'm so. I think that'd be interesting and nice for certain use cases. And I'm guessing if it did come out, I would probably like it, but I'm not like going crazy for it. The other one was not really a feature request, but just saying don't use transactions and things like that. That was a more recent one. And I disagree with him there. I think you should try to avoid transactions. You should try and keep them as small as possible. But I think in certain use cases, hey, they're really valuable. And, assuming the right things are true, they aren't going to sort of blow up your application.
So
do you remember any of his other sort of things?
I mean, like, it was like he was kind of angry. So
yeah. I know, I can't remember now. It's been a year, so
yeah. I mean, just like I was thinking, okay, now Mongo will be a perfect database, okay. Yeah. But then when you look at Mongo, it still has, I mean, stuff to complain.
Yeah. That's true. I think like he was excited about some of the stuff at Mongo. You could do array indexing. You could do different types of indexing where he's like, hey. With Dynamo, it's like you sort of have all these tools and you're doing it yourself, where like Mongo is sort of managed for you. They've got like Atlas has like a search thing tied into it. And that goes into what we were talking about earlier. Like, I think Mongo has a super different philosophy than DynamoDB. Very like, even though it's same rough underlying tech, you're horizontally sharding and you're using the key to split that data. It's like very different philosophy in like how we handle the hard cases, where Dynamo's like, mostly we won't, like you sort of have to handle the hard cases. And Mongo's like, we'll do scatter gather. We'll do whatever it takes on some of this stuff, even if it results in less predictable performance or less linear scaling as you go.
So how do you feel that now that JSON support is very much a thing in the relational database, you can do stuff in relational databases that like a document-based stuff. Like you can change a field in a JSON, which is in a column, in a table, in a row, and you can easily update a single piece of JSON.
Yeah.
So it's super powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I never was like that pumped about like the just like JSON document model aspect of Mongo or like the stuff around Dynamo. Like I know it's absolutely true that as you get bigger, like migrations become a much bigger pain for SQL, but then that's gotten a lot better than where it was, 10 years ago when like GitHub's releasing Ghost and things like that. Like it's gotten a lot better for that. So I think that's like the less interesting part of NoSQL as compared to SQL.
Okay. So I mean, just trying to understand, like, you saw some of this, some of the examples where people are making single table design out of relational databases. So you can pretty much do all these things, crazy stuff. So anyway, related to single table design, like, do you think that maybe some of these ChatGPT tools or stuff can help us? And if I just give them idea on like, what do I want? Can they just make it? I mean, the rules should be pretty clear.
Probably, yeah. Like, I mean, honestly, with the customers I talk to, it's like the same questions I'm always asking. Trying to get a sense of the shape of their data, the velocity of their data, like what their specific needs are, what constraints they need to maintain, and trying to do that. I think that should be, something that ChatGPT could figure out and at least assist with in certain ways on that stuff. There's a little bit of art to NoSQL, but it's not crazy. And I actually think like people try and get too fancy with it or like a little too wild with it when it's like, hey, like most of the time you're sort of working with individual items, you're getting a range of items, things like that. Like you don't need to get super crazy with it.
Yeah. Would you recommend someone who is coming from university to start his first projects in relational databases or in Dynamo? Do you think that it's necessary, or it's even, maybe it can be bad for someone to learn SQL before trying Dynamo?
That's a good question. I would say if you're new, I would still probably recommend SQL just because like the training wheels are there, right? Like you have the structure of ORMs or different frameworks that are working with that. You have the structure of a forced schema and what that's going to do for you. It gives you some flexibility, and hey, you can throw more indexes at it later to like help with some of that stuff, and maybe it just costs you a little more. Whereas like you really can get into a pickle if you do NoSQL pretty poorly. I would like people straight out of university to like understand how NoSQL works and what it's doing, because I do think like, again, the transparency and the visibility of like what Dynamo is doing like helps you learn SQL better. It helps you learn data warehouses better. It helps you learn Elasticsearch better. Like all those sorts of things. You're just like, okay, now I know what it's expensive and like what the strategies it's trying to do here, and how can I make that easier for whatever tool I'm doing.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this just helps us make some better designs, okay, but never a perfect design. That's like an iPhone with a notch. You just expect like a perfect iPhone to come up, and then they introduce notch.
That little flaw. Yeah.
So just again and again, like, so it's always like a small, maybe on purpose flaw. Okay, so maybe a couple more questions, and then that's it. We'll wrap it for today. So related to pricing, so did you ever come into a situation where Dynamo is getting too expensive for customers?
I would say the big issue you're going to have there is if you have too many indexes about that, and if you have items that are getting replicated to a lot of indexes, especially if they're big items and you're doing full projections and they're getting replicated, like that's where it's really going to kill you. It's fairly hard to get killed on reads. You can, but like I think writes and replication or index replication specifically is like where that's
does single table design add to this? Maybe does it make like worse situation in terms of
potential? I think because partly because you're going to have like probably additional attributes which are going to increase your item size, so you have both your storage costs but also your RCU or WCU costs potentially. Like I do see people that have single table design where like the single table index items are like a huge portion of their total item size, and I'm like, well, let's see if we could do something around and maybe back up a little bit. And if these are like pretty isolated items, maybe you don't need to go full single table, and you can just index some of those attributes directly on some of that stuff and save a lot of money. So I think thinking about that balance there, especially depending on how much you're indexing there, can hurt you. And also it's harder to do index projections if you're doing like overloaded indexes and things like that. So yeah, that can hurt you.
Out of this whole story, it comes that maybe there is a market for smart indexing for AWS. I mean, for some plugins, people can add an index, deploy this index as a CloudFormation stuff, and people can come up with some smart indexing, some really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's probably like part into
creating new tables from data that you already have or something.
Yeah, I definitely think like that downstream, like consuming a stream and aggregating in some way, putting it into a table. It's a little bit of a difficult UX issue there. How do you expose the right things to people? But that can, I think that'd be helpful.
One more thing to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Like, so I'll thank you for this conversation. I mean, that was really, really nice. I just, I just, as I told at the beginning, I mean, there's nothing to grill you about, this is all known. I really like your book, I mean, the way you presented it, it's perfect for the way you presented these topics. Is the way it's simple. It should be good for a low intelligent entity like GPT is, to understand and consume and then produce some stuff, if it's even easier than with the AWS manual or frequently asked questions. So it would probably produce some nice sentences and explain why is it so. Okay, so that's how I see your book.
Thanks. So I mean, one thing I would say with the AWS documentation is it's hard for them. They can't be as prescriptive, right? Because they have to handle so many use cases. They also can't like crap on someone's feature that came out, or maybe that shouldn't be supported, or different things like that. But like me being a third party or other people that have done stuff, you can be a little bit more opinionated and say, hey, use this, don't use it. Like this feature is not worth it except for this tiny use case, which probably doesn't apply to you, and things like that. It's a little easier to do things like that.
Great, man. Thank you very much for the conversation. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Go on. It's always good to see you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, anybody out there, feel free to hit me up with questions if you have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye bye.